The first Rhode Island Democratic gubernatorial candidate forum is in the books, but the conversation is just beginning. Hosted by Bill Bartholomew, hear from Democratic candidates Helena Folkes and Governor Dan McKee as they make their case to voters. Listen now at ripodcast.com or watch the full conversation at 997wpro.com.
All right, welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew. A new poll this week from the Salve, Regina University Pell Center, Voices of Value Project. This is the August 2026 survey report. And look, the headline, Helena Folkes leads incumbent Governor Dan McKee 48% to 28% in the Democratic primary for Rhode Island governor. We're joined here on the pod by Katie Sonder, who is the Pell Center Associate Director and Fellow, to break down this poll and sort of get a sense of when the poll was taken and what it might indicate as we move forward here. Early voting starting in just a matter of hours from when most people hear this. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
What's your major takeaway other than the obvious from this poll in terms of this being a snapshot in time? Is it the fact that so many people are undecided in so many races? Is it that it's consistent with other polls that we've seen from other academic or media institutions over the course of the year, or something else?
Yeah, I think if I'm thinking about the most surprising data to come out of the poll, it is the percentages of likely voters who are unsure of who they are going to vote for on primary day. Certainly in the down-ballot races for lieutenant governor and attorney general, we're seeing almost half of likely voters saying they're unsure. And even in the governor's race among the Democratic primary voters, we're seeing 22% who are still deciding between Foulkes and McKee.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a major number when you think about the fact that, especially in the governors in the Democratic primary, these are two people who have been running against each other for 6 years. So it's not as if these are, two non-incumbents who are introducing themselves to the state for the first time. That also could be why that 22% number is there, because people are saying, look, I've seen them enough times. I don't really know who I want to go with. Now, that leads me to want to break down the methodology behind the poll. Can you explain how the poll works in terms of how people, what people heard if they were asked a question about the governor's race, for example, and the multi-step process that led you to the aggregate number that you put forth?
Sure. Well, this is a survey of likely primary voters in Rhode Island. So they're asked a battery of questions about their plans to vote in the primary election. And this poll was very much focused on primary day. Who are you going to vote for? So the first question we asked was, who do you plan to vote for between these two candidates for governor, McKee or Folkes? People chose one candidate, said not sure. And if they said not sure, then they were asked again, if you had to choose, who would you choose between? Still, even in that second question, among people who said unsure to the first question, we still see 64% sticking with their unsure vote, but we aggregate those two questions together to come to our data set, which shows up in the report, which is that Folkes leads McKee 20 percentage points, 48 to 28.
Right. And so basically, the way this works is, let's say I'm the person that's responding to the poll. I'm a likely Democratic primary voter, and the pollster asks, "Hey, who would you vote for? Who's your preference for governor, McKee or Folkes?" And I say, "I don't have a preference." Then you are asked a subsequent question, which is, "Okay, well, if you had to pick between the two of them, who would you pick?" And then from there, the answer to the first question, if someone is Folkes, McKee, or undecided, is aggregated with the secondary response. And that's how you come up with a number. That's a fair sort of elevator encapsulation.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. What made you decide to poll this race? because it's not free, right? You're not. This is an undertaking. What's the gap, or what did you see you needed to fill at the Pell Center?
Yeah, Voices of Value is a survey project that is a little over 2 years old, and the overall project goal is to get an understanding of how Rhode Island voters view important Rhode Island issues, as well as American issues. We've asked in previous polls about perceptions of the health of U.S. democracy, perceptions of levels of polarization, news media consumption habits, specific legislative questions, thoughts on the bridge reconstruction. And when we started the project, we saw ourselves as filling a gap in Rhode Island on political polling. There wasn't major political outlets or major news outlets putting out polling at that time when we began the project. For this particular poll, it was focused entirely on the primary races to help provide a snapshot of where likely Rhode Island voters stood on the candidates.
It's interesting because the Pell Center, I think of the Pell Center and some of the great work that's come out of the center on journalism matters. For example, recently hosting a panel discussion, a whole day of discussion, including a panel discussion that I was a part of with other journalists and editors. And what is becoming more and more interesting to me is that there is a pathway where academia starts to fill in some of that which is being either destroyed by or corporations or gutted at minimum, and the difficulty for individual startups to try to launch something. It feels like academia is already doing journalism and undertaking polling. That's traditionally the work of journalists. And here we have Salve, obviously Quinnipiac, et cetera. There are academic applications of polling. But it's not like the Providence Journal did this, or WPRO, or Channel 10. This is Salve Regina. Does this mark a shift in journalism to you?
Well, I will say we have two of our fellows are former journalists, G. Wayne Miller and Colin Woodward. Wayne Miller is doing a project through the Pell Center called Ocean State Stories, which is working to bring long-form journalism back to the state. Colin Woodward is grappling with questions of what's the American story that unites us across all 50 states. And we see this as providing a public good, frankly, that not only enhances the academic and social experience at Salve Regina, but can act as a community bridge in these times where we're seeing local news outlets shrinking budgets and collapsing in worst case scenarios. So that Salve has the means to provide this service to the community. We're happy that we can do it.
Yeah, I think it's huge in a way that, isn't being discussed enough, which is this is a dramatic shift in the role of academia but in terms of in relation to traditional media outlets. NPR, Public's radio, or Ocean State Media, they're not polling. As far as I know, maybe they are. They haven't put any polls out. Boston Globe, I haven't seen any polls out. So Bartholomew Town, we're not putting polls out. It's super expensive. This is an important thing that's happening here in our political ecosystem. Save for the WPRI Emerson poll and your poll, we would be left with basically a UNH poll that has been consistent, but it's sort of singular, and then candidate polls. And so I hope this is a great service that marks a shift in the way that elections are communicated in Rhode Island. This is a big moment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that was a major impetus for the start of this project, that we noticed this gap in felt that we had the means and the expertise to fill it. And, as an academic institution, there's no partisan lean. We're a bipartisan center that is also we see ourselves as a bridge between the community and the university as well.
Yeah. All right. Last question on the specifics of this poll. And by the way, I would encourage anybody who's hearing this who wants to go a little deeper. I was able to book Katie yesterday for WPRO. Great interview with Dan York that really breaks down the specifics of the poll. If you want to go deeper, rather than rehash that mostly for Katie and all of your time, Dan did a great job with it. 997wpro.com, or just look wherever you're listening to Bartholomew. You can find the Dan York show. But just in terms of this specific poll, and I think some of the revelations in Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General, it does seem to be clear that we now have kind of some front runners from what we're looking at right now. But then, of course, who knows? So, what as the voice, if you will, behind this poll, what's your message to voters out there? What's your message to candidates on the reliability of these numbers and in terms of how they should position themselves based on the numbers that you've put forth?
Well, first, to answer your question on reliability, we use standards of academic rigor and expertise in polling to not only craft our questions, but also ensure that we're receiving a sample that accurately, as best it can, represents voters who are likely to show up on primary day. Regarding the down-ballot races, in particular for Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General, a crowded field compared to the gubernatorial race and Jack Reed's seat for Senate, for example. So we see more candidates, and so there's more dispersion for people picking who they're going to vote for, and less name recognition, frankly, I think, compared especially to someone like Senator Jack Reed, who has been in this seat for many years. In the lieutenant governor's race, we see incumbent Sabina Matos at 18%, 2 percentage points ahead of the next closest candidate, which is former Newport Mayor Zay, but 48% of likely Rhode Island voters saying they are unsure. Similar numbers for the AG, 46% saying they're unsure of who they're going to vote for. Kim Ahern coming in strongest with 23% of the vote. Again, a more crowded field, less name recognition, but I think one of my personal hopes for putting out a poll like this is that it gets the candidates' names in front of people. It shows what their ballot will look like and potentially encourages them to do research like candidates, understand their priorities and their stances on issues that greatly impact the livelihoods of Rhode Islanders day to day.
Yeah. And there's some stuff as well that jumped out to me is that, for example, in that Jack Reed race, which is polled as a three-way race, it's also featuring Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, no stranger to longtime listeners of this podcast, who ran for governor in 2018 and 2020 and has been on as an expert in the past as well. But he had 3%, but Connor Burbridge at 12%, yeah, that makes sense. Because there's the whole thing, well, you're always going to get 30-something% if you just put your name on the ballot, right? If you're a Republican in Rhode Island, you're just by being on the ballot, there's 30 to 37% usually available for you as an opposition figure. Same in a primary. Jack Reed's not going to run 100%. There's always going to be some room. But Connor Burbridge is a guy who, over the last year and a half has been on the ground hustling and actually campaigning and building some kind of momentum. Is it David Morales momentum? No. But is it real? Yes. So it's not surprising to see it show up as 12%. Same with a head-to-head between Kamsavoravong and Matos in the lieutenant governor's race. That feels right. It passes the feel test. I know that's not data. I know that's not particularly academic, but it also does measure the pulse of the state in tandem with the numbers. So from that standpoint, I think those numbers are extraordinarily reliable just in terms of an initial burst. I was surprised to see Cindy Coyne at 2% in that lieutenant governor's race. That feels like a dramatic underperformance. I don't think she would be a front runner, but to be surpassed by Ross McCurdy, who's got like $7,000 in his account, is surprising. But let's move to lastly here to the Republicans. Very difficult to poll Republicans in Rhode Island. The sample size is difficult to capture in a meaningful way. Yet at the same time, this poll shows that Elaine Poirino, it continues to have something like a 20-point lead over Erin Guckian in the Republican gubernatorial primary. What do you make of that? What do you make of that in terms of, can we poll Republicans reliably in a way where we can hold those numbers side by side with the Democrat primary, which are pretty tried and true in terms of reliability?
Yeah, we polled 307 likely Republican primary voters out of our survey total, which was around 857. So if we're talking deep in polling best practices, you're talking margin of error, which is a confidence measure of this person might, and in this case, Poirino's coming in at 37%. Our poll is saying that she's likely to land within 30% of the 37% of the vote, give or take 3.6 percentage points on either side. But the margin of error gets bigger the smaller your sample size. So when we're talking about the Republican primary and 300 people, that margin of error is a little higher. So it gets up to like 5.6% on either side of that 37%. So we're less confident, for lack of a better term, when our sample size gets smaller, but we're polling the right amount of people to be at a comfortable level of confidence. But with that race in particular, on the Republican side, again, we see 44% are unsure. So we can't make an accurate prediction at this point of who is going to win that particular race. Looking at the crosstabs for that, between those two candidates in particularly, Poirino has the most support generally across demographics, sex, age, location, except for people of color who pulled ahead for Guckian.
Yeah. Well, bizarre. It's a bizarre time. I mean, it's been a long time coming. The Rhode Island Republican Party has been very, very dire straits organizationally. And here you have two candidates who, both struggle outside of maybe those who really pay attention. Nobody has any idea who they are. I think so out on an average basis. So it's even more difficult to poll because it's not like, okay, here's Alan Fong and another name you might recognize. So extraordinarily difficult to poll right there. Look, I think it's well worth people perusing this for themselves. You don't need any sort of special degree or any kind of special equipment to review these polls. And you could certainly understand it, particularly if you use an AI chatbot to ask you how to break down some of the numbers if you are unsure. But and I would encourage people to go through it and start to understand these for yourself. So as they come out more and more, particularly when they're academically driven, not candidate driven, you can start to weigh whether or not what you're reading feels like what you're filling out in public, much like this poll does right here. So Katie, how can people find the actual poll? Just if you could give them a call to action.
Absolutely. Pellcenter.org is the place for finding this poll. And as you were saying, Bill, we value transparency in this polling work. So you can download the report, which shows the data and easy to read graphs. You can download the crosstabs, which shows every question and the percentages of answers across all demographics. You can download the methodology statement. You can download the survey questions that we put in front of the survey respondents. So people can really see the entire picture and then decide how deep they want to go into the data.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that transparency is so critical and it feels different. It feels, I don't know if I recognize it, as a consumer that the fact that you can go in deep and see for yourself that there's no manipulation. We're swimming through this sewer of the death of expertise. I always think of Tom Nichols in his book, and academia, journalism, science, whatever it is under attack. There's no other way to put it. It's just a reality. And whenever this type of stuff comes up, I always say, well, then go get the report, read it. If you can't figure it out, just ask an AI chatbot to walk you through it. It's right there to see, and be grateful that we have civically engaged institutions like the Pell Center and Salve and smart people like Katie Sonder in our community. And we're not out here just winging it. And that's where we would be if it weren't for these kinds of institutions. We would be winging it and relying on candidate-based polling and third-party expenditure-based polling and a WPRI here and there to drop one. So thanks to the Pell Center.
I appreciate that, Bill. Thank you very much.